Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to configure your ASP.NET application to use managed identity on Azure. Managed identity solves the problem of storing credentials. Let's say you have a database on Azure and you want to access that database from your local machine, and also you want to access the same database when you have deployed the application to Azure as well. So you should keep the credential, the connection string of your database on your code or somewhere. But since you are logged in to your Visual Studio, you don't have to keep that connection string because you can use that logged in credential for accessing the database. And when you have deployed that application to Azure, you don't have to keep another connection string there because Azure is secure. Managed identity started treating all your apps that access another services as Active Directory objects, and you can easily manage the access with this. And today I'm going to show you how to use Azure default credential to manage your identities. When you're using default credential, it will first check environment variables. If you have deployed this on Azure, it will use managed identity endpoint that will be attached when you turn on managed identity to get the credential. And if you are running it on Visual Studio, it will use Visual Studio Azure Service account for getting the token. And if it couldn't find the credentials, it will go into even CLI or interactive methods for getting the credential. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create few resources on Azure with this script here. First, I'm going to create this resource group and then a app service and then this SQL database. I'm adding a firewall rule to connect from a local machine, and I'm displaying the information here to connect to it easily. Now let me go ahead and copy this script to create the resources that we want on Azure. I've copied them and I'm going into terminal and let me create the resources. As you can see, all my resources just got created. Now let me copy this and I'm going into my SSMS. And let me connect to that endpoint. Let me try to connect it from here. As you can see, I'm getting this message here because I haven't registered this user as admin in this database. For that, now let me go to Azure portal. Let me click refresh. I am in this resource group. Now let me go into this SQL server and then I'm going into Active Directory and I'm going to set an admin. I'll be using this user for logging into this SQL server. Alright, now let me try again. Alright, as you can see, I have logged into the database. There's one important thing that for you to notice. I have logged into this database using my AD account, and I have done this because I will have to create this user here for accessing the database with managed identity. For creating this user, you should be logged in as an admin user. That's why I have enabled admin user for John D account and then I have logged in from it. So now let me execute this SQL, sample SQL that will create two customers in the database. The next thing that we should do is creating our sample.NET application. Let me do that real quick. Here I have created this boilerplate code. Let me create the database models. Let me select this table here. I'm using EF Core Power Tools to do this. Let me call it model and my database context is ready, as you can see. Alright, now let me clean up this controller a little bit. I'm accessing the controller from the root. And finally, I'm going to access the database context and read all the customers. Now, I'm doing a few other small changes here. I'm going to change the launch URL because from now on, there will be only the root endpoint. And then I'm going into startup. And here I'm removing this development check because if there is an error, I should be able to see the error. Alright, since we are using managed identity, we need a package called Azure Identity. Let me install that now. And we need a custom authentication provider. Let me add a class here. I have introduced a custom SQL authentication provider here. This will resolve the managed identity token for us. And as I said before, this class is used for resolving the tokens. Alright, that class is ready. Now let me go to startup. And now I'm going to add EF core to dependency injection. There's one other NuGet package that I have missed to install. Let me install it now. And that is Microsoft.data.sql client. Alright, now finally we'll have to introduce the connection string, but that does not contain any usernames or passwords. Let me go into app settings and then I'm going to introduce this. This contains the connection string. As you can see, it does not contain any username or password, but it will contain the authentication method, and that is Active Directory device code flow. And now it is time for us to run our application and see what happens. Let me run it now. As you can see, we are getting the results from the database. And why did this work? Because we haven't added any username or password in our connection string. This worked because I have logged in to this Visual Studio with this account here, and if we go to Azure portal and to this Active Directory page, here I have configured the same user. If I remove this here, you won't be able to access it from Visual Studio. Now, since I can access this from Visual Studio, we have successfully configured the app to use managed identity. So basically, as I shown you earlier, it first checked managed identity endpoint. Now it is validating with Visual Studio account. Now it's time for us to publish this application and see this run on Azure. For that, let me right click here and go to publish, and here I'm going to select Azure and App Service Windows, and here we can see the app service that we have created with CLI, and let me click publish now. Alright, as you can see, we are getting this error: default credential failed to retrieve a token from environment or managed identity or Visual Studio or any other way. Now let's understand why this happened. Even though I have logged in to my Visual Studio here, I haven't enabled my app service for accessing the database. For that, I will have to go into my Azure portal and do a few configurations. Let me do that now. Alright, I'm going into SQL Server, and here if you look at role assignments, I have John D as the owner and it is an inherited access, but I don't see my app service here. App service does not have permission to access this SQL server. For that, I'm going into my app service, and then I'm going into identity section here, and then I'm going to register this app service on my Active Directory. For that, let me turn this on and save this. Here what I'm doing is basically registering this application on Azure Active Directory, and after registering it, I'm getting this object ID as well, because this is an object on Active Directory now. Since we have registered this on Active Directory, let me go back to my SQL server here and go into access control and role assignments. I can just click here and add a role assignment, and I'm going to give owner access, but that's not necessary. But owner has a lot of other permissions as well, and here I'm selecting managed identity option. And if you look here, since we have enabled managed identity for this app service, we're getting this option. I'm selecting that. All right, now I'm going to review and assign. Now I have assigned access for that app service for accessing this database. Let me try again. As you can see, we're getting a different error. We have fixed the first one. Basically, the first one did not allow any access, but here what you're seeing is login failed. And this is because even though we have allowed access from Azure portal for accessing the SQL server, we need to have a user in that database. So let me go to my script that I have prepared here and let me copy this. This will create this user, and this is the name of the app service that I have created. Now let me copy this script here and go into SSMS, and then I'm going to run this. And remember, you should be logged in as an admin user for running this command. Now let me go back to my browser and let's try to refresh it. As you can see, I am getting the response from the database. And this is how you work with managed identity with Azure SQL and Entity Framework. I will be attaching this code here and this script here below in the description if you want to try this out yourself. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. And don't forget to subscribe if you think you learned something new today. And thanks for watching.